So my mother-in-law messaged me the other day. She said,
I really love those woven charcuterie boards.
and seeing as she had to come up with a gift for a retirement party, I said, I can make one. And here's how I did it. So I started out with a trip to the scrap wood bin and cut them all to length on my miter saw, all different kinds of species and brands that I could find, so we'd have a nice mixture of colorful wood. There was some black walnut and some maple and some cherry and some tiger wood and even some purple heart that I had kicking around in my bin. So onto the jointer where I face to face. And then once I had a face faced, I could turn them over and joint the edges so they'll be all nice and smooth and jointable and gluable, so I can make some bigger panels which I could cut up again. Now all these bits and pieces were all different thicknesses still, so I lined them up from one end to the other with the varying thicknesses so I could run them through the thickness planer and get them all to the same thickness. Now that I had three sides all square and they're all the same thickness, went over to the table saw just to finish up what I needed to do there, just cutting a very slim piece off the edge of each of the boards so they're all different varying widths now. While I was working on the table saw, I figured I may as well cut up the thin strips that I need. So I used my thin strip jig on the table saw very carefully to cut up some 1/16 inch strips of maple. In this case, I think the maple is going to make a nice accent between the curvy cuts. Now for the first of many glue ups as this project is going to need, I've glued some larger panels and some smaller panels together, and you'll see why very shortly, because you need to stack them together and make your curvy straight cuts. I used cawls on the larger panel just to make sure the panels were really flat. I need to salvage as much material out of these as I can because they're already getting kind of thin because they've been through the planer, and they need to go through the planer once again. At least. So after the glue up, I did a little bit of glue cleaning after it had all set. And as you can see, I'm left with three different sections of varying material that I can work away on. I need to be able to work on these stacked pieces of wood simultaneously, cutting them on the bandsaw. So the best way to do that is to use the old blue painter's trick and use some CA glue and glue the pieces together in a stacked, fixed position. So now I can take them over to the bandsaw. For this application, I used both CA glue on one piece of the blue tape, and on the blue tape on the opposite side, I used the accelerator so that when I stuck them together, the accelerator accelerated the process and the wood was all stuck together. Here's the fun part. Later in the evening, after a couple of wobbly pops or two or three, I came back and drew some perfectly straight lines on the board so I could have a guide on the bandsaw. The next morning, after a few cups of coffee, I could take it onto the bandsaw and follow my not so perfectly straight, okay, really intentionally curvy lines. So for the first sanding process, what I did is I left the two pieces glued together, and then I just took some 80 grit sandpaper, the coarsest I could get, and just smoothed out the bandsaw marks on the wood on both edges at the same time. It was kind of tedious and very time consuming. I wasn't a big fan of that process. Then I had another issue. It seems that the pieces wanted to stick together too well to the blue tape, and I actually broke a little piece off. Ah well, that looks like an easy fix. I found a better way to complete that really onerous task of sanding by hand. The drum sander took off just enough, and then I could have the two pieces readily available and mate them up till they were perfectly mated with all the bandsaw marks gone. So, glue up number 2. This one a little bit more interesting. The curvy bits, I had to introduce the maple strips in between the well-matched curvy bits. So there's a lot of glue flying around. The other thing I had to do on this one, you remember a little piece that fell out? Well, I had to get a little bit inventive and find a way to glue that piece back in. All in all, it worked out pretty good. You'll see that I left the strips actually a little proud of the surface. That's just for safety's sake, and they'll be very easy to plane off afterwards. So I took the 3 wavy sections all glued up together and planed them off and made myself a whole bunch of chips. Nice packaging chips. I'll use them later. The next glue up, I had to re-glue the panels back together again. This time I'm going to get smart. I'm just going to use the CA glue on the painter's tape and not use the accelerator. Maybe they won't get so stuck together and I'll break them this time, because there's actually a lot more intricate pieces in there than there was the last time. You'll also notice I got a little inventive. I stacked all the boards onto the one big main board this time so that there's just one board to take to the bandsaw to cut. And again, after a couple of evening wobbly pops, I drew some perfectly straight lines on there and went over to the bandsaw the next day to cut out my perfectly straight lines. Okay, well that came apart much better, nothing broke. So it's time to do a glue up again. This one got kind of tedious and interesting in that you got to have everything in the exact right order to get things all glued up properly. If you have one piece out of place or one piece backwards, you find out halfway through you spread glue all over the place, and all those springy little strips of maple, they go flying everywhere. This was one of the worst glue ups I ever had. It was not a whole lot of fun. So after a whole lot of cursing and swearing and wiping glue on everywhere on everything, I finally got it stuck together. Man, that was a chore. So next was on to the next day making more shaving chips and more packing chips by carving down all the extra bits of maple. I guess I could have really just tried to glue that up in a couple of pieces, but that wouldn't have been any fun now, would it? Okay, so here we are. I've been planing away for about an hour now because I don't really trust sending this finely crafted piece of material through the planer. Might damage it, I'm not sure. So I hand planed it all, and I got myself a whole bucket of packaging chips here that is going to be a good thing to have. I'm not really digging it, man. It's too busy. The last board that I did turned out what I think artistically a little bit more impressive because it had a section that was hand woven. I'm really liking this technique. It's a really good technique. I preferred to the router one, which if you look at my previous video, I'll put a link somewhere. I like this method. It is superior. And it looks kind of funky. I mean, it's got enough color variance with the maple and the black walnut and a little bit of tiger wood and a little bit of purple heart going on. But so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a little more bang for my wood buck, and I'm actually going to cut this and make this into 3 different boards. Good thinking, Dan. Whenever you make a mistake and something's not working out, change your plan. Nobody's ever going to know the difference. They'll be beautiful. I think that was a heck of an idea, making 3 boards out of 1. Anyways, I won't bore you with the gory details. All I did was found some more black walnut kicking around. Did the whole machining process on the jointer, on the planer, and got it all to the same thickness. Glued them all up. So here's my 3 boards, and I think they look pretty darn good at this point. It was in a final trip, I might add, over to the planer to get everything all cleaned up and finally flattened. All the boards were 13 inches wide, so I can put them through the planer. So the next step of this operation is to put a little bit of a chamfer on the bottom of the boards. I set my saw blade angle at 5 degrees and I break out my big backer board that I attach to the fence. This operation is a little iffy for a couple of reasons. Number one, there's a lot of blade exposed, so it gets kind of dangerous. So you got to really pay attention to what you're doing, which is why I used the tall fence for this situation. The other issue that I had is that the very small pieces that came off the offcuts could actually fit down in between the plate. So as you can see, some of them went flying. Some of them even disappeared, but I was prepared for it. I stayed out of the way, kept myself safe. The final detail was to add a little bit of a round over to the top edge of the boards. Gives it a really nice feel. I did that on the router with just a little 1/4 inch round over bit. Hey, we're down to the nitty gritty on my 3 boards here. They're looking mighty fine. I sanded the backside with 80 grit because the saw leaves quite a few marks in it. So I do that first, 80 grit. I finish that next with 150, and I leave it at 150 because we're not gonna be looking at the bottom that much. So I burnt out some 80 grit, and I've burnt out some 120 grit, and I've burnt out some 220 grit. All the tops are all final finished to 220 grit. One of the last things I'm gonna do before I put a coating on it is basically squirt some water on it. Squirt some water on it. Well, I'm gonna get some water on it. Yeah, just squirt some water on it. There we go. And just pop the grain a little bit. Okay, that might have been a little bit too much water, but you get the point. And all it does is let the fibers stand up so I can come along with some 400 grit and scuff it all off. So all ready to sand with 400 grit. I can feel the little fibers standing on end, standing at attention, waiting for me to come and lop them off. This is a really important step because one lady told me as I was trying to sell some products, the first thing she did was actually feel it. If it wasn't smooth, she told me it's not going to sell because people really like to feel the smoothness. Okay, we're going to blow her off. Get all the dust out of there. And the product that we're going to be using is Terra Nova circa 1850 natural oil, and it's designed specifically for food products. So it's a natural oil that you can put food on because these are going to have some food on it, being charcuterie boards. And it's a wipe on, let it sit for 15 minutes, and then come back and wipe it off. Looking pretty good. This wood's really dry, really porous, especially on the end grains, so it really wants to suck that oil in. Pretty cool. I'm digging it. So the obligatory branding, so you can tell where they came from, whoever received these gifts. They may end up under someone's Christmas tree this year. I like to put little rubber feet on them so that they sit evenly on a platform and they don't move around so much. And there you have it. 3 beautiful boards, all ready to go. Oh well, a little darker, that's okay. Oh hey, I'm just rubbing some morning wood here. Now, I mean, it's morning, I just got off night shift. It's morning and I'm rubbing a finish on this project that I'm finishing up here. It's kind of an interesting little project. It's a it's a no joinery box that I've been experimenting with, and it's a surprise and it turned out very well. But that's another video for another day.